This is your profanity warning. Your warning that bad words are about to be said in the following podcast. If there are children in the room, in the house, or indeed within a 5-mile radius, please send them away. This podcast is not for us. Is that good?
Yeah, it was great. That was perfect.
Okay.
Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
Stop it now. I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of here.
Johnny.
At you live from the recent past in New York City, where we board up the doors and windows only to let people from New Jersey and Long Island come streaming in, damn it. Welcome to 21 Jump Scare. I'm Bradford Lorick.
And I'm Eric Winnick.
21 Jump Scare is a podcast about horror films, and it's told from several points of view.
Well, two, actually. We call this podcast 21 Jump Scare because, at least for now, our plan is to only produce 21 episodes.
Well, but also because, as in a certain TV series from the late 80s, one of us is going back to school, as it were, to learn something new. And this weirdo will be experiencing a horror film he hasn't seen yet. Unbelievably.
So each week we bring you a film from the perspective of someone rewatching it and from the point of view of someone experiencing it for the first time, which is to say, me. So now let us turn to this week's film, the 1968 zombie film that doesn't actually mention the word zombie, Night of the Living Dead.
Okay, Mr. Winnick. So as our first timer, why don't you start us off with a brief synopsis?
The late 60s. Somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, siblings Johnny and Barbra are visiting their father's grave in order to place a wreath on it, a yearly ritual that brings out the worst in both of them. This year's trip, however, will be interrupted by the presence of a slowly moving human with a dead 1,000-mile stare who kills Johnny and almost does in Barbra, who manages to escape by disengaging the emergency brake on their car. With the strange man relentlessly pursuing her, Barbra takes refuge in a nearby farmhouse where she finds the corpse of a dead woman and where she is soon joined by Ben, also seeking shelter from what is quickly becoming a horde of strange, shambling individuals hell-bent on murdering any human in their path. Boarding up the windows and doors, Ben tries to engage Barbra, but she has been rendered near-catatonic by the death of her brother and by their situation, which is described on the radio as a freak event, possibly caused by radiation from a satellite recently returned from Venus. Soon, the pair receive another surprise when 5 people emerge from the cellar of the house, a family of 3, the Coopers, and lovebirds Tom and Judy. As Ben details his plan to secure them on the ground floor, Mr. Cooper argues that the cellar will be a far better hiding place. Meanwhile, the TV details more atrocities. The slow-walking ghouls are in fact flesh eaters and are causing mayhem up and down the entire East Coast. Will Ben, Barbra, and their new friends/adversaries make it out of the house? Will the government get its act together in time to conquer the demented plague of cannibals? For all of them, the long, dark night of the soul is only getting stranger and more deadly.
Ooh, got chills. So who's in this film, Mr. Winnick?
Well, this film features a cast of unknowns, all of whom were acting or doing other things in the Metro Pittsburgh area in 1968.
That's not a real thing.
It's a real it's a well,
Metro Pittsburgh.
I mean, Pittsburgh's a real thing.
So I hear.
Anyway, you being from Pennsylvania, you might be able to tell us a thing or two about it. Maybe you know these people. Maybe you know Duane Jones, who played
He used
Ben.
to babysit me when I was a kid.
Of course.
Taught me everything I needed to know about boarding up a house.
Judith O'Day is Barbara. Karl Hardman is Harry Cooper. Hardman's real-life companion and business partner, Marilyn Eastman, is Helen Cooper. Keith Wayne is Tom. Judith Ridley is Judy, and her real-life husband at the time, Russell Streiner, plays Johnny, and Kyra Schoen, Karl Hardman's real-life daughter, plays young Karen Cooper.
Now, the director is George A. Romero.
Oh.
And the screenwriters are Romero and John Russo. This was the feature film debut of George Romero, who sadly left us in 2017 at the age of 77. He has not come back yet, and who became known as the King of the Zombies. And in fact, Mr. Romero directed 5 more ... of the Dead films, the most successful of which was Dawn of the Dead in 1978. He's also known for the Stephen King adaptation Creepshow, Monkey Shines, and the early 70s gems Season of the Witch and The Crazies.
And you know, Bradford, that I have to ask you this question. What is your experience with any of these films?
Oh my God, Creepshow. I mean, Creepshow is major. Creepshow is a sort of reimagination of the sort of omnibus anthology horror film that would have been put out by Avco Embassy, or any of those kinds of Roger Corman light companies in the 60s. But it's a pretty fabulous, modern for the time reinterpretation of Tales from the Crypt or the Vault of Horror. It's inspired by horror comics, and Stephen King contributes and is in one of them. It's a pretty fantastic little movie. Creepshow pulls together a really impressive cast. Leslie Nielsen to Vivica Lindfors. It's I mean, seriously, it's a great cast in Creepshow. Monkey Shines. I mean, it's about a crazy monkey. He shines. Season of the Witch, I'll tell you, there are 2 different cuts of Season of the Witch. One is sort of a softcore porn movie, so I understand. Right. The other is sort of ostensibly a 70s suburban witchcraft film. I saw Season of the Witch on my quest to find a horror film, the title of which I do not know, which I saw on television when I was probably, 4.5 years old. And some context clues led me to believe that it might have been Season of the Witch, and I was sorely disappointed. And of course, The Crazies, which has been subject to the remake factory. The Crazies is also great. It's not too far afield of zombies, but it's another sort of like classic 70s horror film. So, Mr. Winnick, how'd this film do?
Well, according to 21 Jump Scare Hollywood bureau chief IMDb, this film was made for $114,000. Took in almost $5,500 on opening weekend, which was October 4th, 1968, which was my 3-month birthday.
Your 3-month anniversary. Yes,
I was 3 months old on that day. The film became one of the most successful independent movies ever made. It eventually grossed $12 million domestically and $18 million internationally, which means it earned more than 250 times its budget. Not too shabby.
Not too shabby. I hope it made literally everyone involved very, very rich. That would be the only reason I can imagine that we've never heard of half of these actors ever again.
Well, actually, there's more to that tale, which we'll discuss later. But actually, none of them made anything off this film for reasons we have since learned. But anyway,
yes, it's very much a Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of story.
Oh yeah.
But for those who care about such things, NOTLD was also inducted into the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress in 1999.
Which speaks, I think, to just how groundbreaking this film was at the time it was made. And it still has the power to shock and awe, shall we say. So what did critics think of it at the time, sir?
Well, this is interesting. Our pal Roger Ebert didn't write a review of the film so much as a first-hand report of what it was like to see the film in a theater full of kids, as this film came out right before the rating system was imposed. Some choice quotes from his essay. The kids in the audience were stunned. There was almost complete silence. The movie had stopped being delightfully scary about halfway through and had become unexpectedly terrifying. There was a little girl across the aisle from me, maybe 9 years old, who was sitting very still in her seat and crying. I don't think the younger kids really knew what hit them. They were used to going to movies, sure, and they'd seen some horror movies before. But this was something else. It's hard to remember what sort of effect this movie might have had on you when you were 6 or 7. I felt real terror in that neighborhood theater last Saturday afternoon. I saw kids who had no resources they could draw upon to protect themselves from the dread and fear they felt. Raj went on to say, defiantly, Night of the Living Dead was passed for general audiences by the Chicago Police Censor Board. Since it has no nudity in it, it was all right for kids, I guess. This is another example, and there have been a lot of them, of the incompetence and stupidity of the censorship system that Chicago stubbornly maintains under political patronage. Censorship is not the answer, but I would be ashamed to make a civil libertarian argument defending the right of those little girls and boys to see a film which left a lot of them stunned with terror. In a case like this, I'd want to know what the parents were thinking of when they dumped the kids in front of the theater to see a film titled Night of the Living Dead.
This is actually an essay which is well worth your time, and I have to say I had to edit the hell out of it because he spoils a lot of the film in his essay. But yeah, this was him on a tear, and he really, really gives it to the authorities that allowed this film to be shown. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote one of the shortest reviews I've ever read. He dismissed NOTLD in a 3-sentence review as, quote, a grainy little movie acted by what appeared to be non-professional actors who are besieged in a farmhouse by some other non-professional actors who stagger around stiff-legged, pretending to be flesh-eating ghouls. He said the filmmakers were, quote, some people in Pittsburgh, end quote.
Well, Variety was also pretty savage in its assessment. The uncredited reviewer says, it is in execution that the film distastefully excels. No brutalizing stone is left unturned. The rest of the pick is amateurism of the first order. Pittsburgh-based director George A. Romero appears incapable of contriving a single graceful setup, and his cast is uniformly poor. Both Judith O'Dea and Duane Jones are sufficiently talented to warrant supporting roles in a backwoods community theater, but Russell Streiner, Karl Hardman, Keith Wayne, and Judith Ridley do not suggest that Pittsburgh is a haven for undiscovered thespians.
So now's about the time that we need to issue a full spoiler alert.
We will be spoiling this film completely and utterly. If you have not seen this film, then what is your problem? Oh my God. We urge you to please watch this film, preferably in a dark room. Then come back and listen to the rest of the episode.
We have to go out and get Johnny. He's out there. Please, don't you hear me? We've got to go out and get him. Please! We have got to go get Johnny! Please help me! Please!
Don't you know what's going on out there? This is no Sunday school picnic.
Don't you understand? My brother is alone!
Your brother is dead.
No! My brother is not dead!
Mr. Lorick, I am so curious to hear, how did you first hear about this film and where did you see it?
Everyone knows about this movie. Everyone knows about this movie. It's in the public fucking domain. You can probably watch the entire thing for free on YouTube if you're too cheap for Prime. I mean, this is a genre-defining classic horror film. This film probably helped define, quite frankly, the concept of independent cinema in America. It is a horror film revolution. This is the first time we've ever seen a zombie that wasn't related somehow to magic or voodoo in a film like White Zombie with Bela Lugosi. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is a game changer. Not only did it spawn a legion of imitators, but also Romero himself returned to not only the genre, but virtually sequels of this film for his entire career. I couldn't even tell you where I saw it for the first time or when I saw it for the first time, because it's so omnipresent when you think about the horror genre. I mean, I think I might have even seen a sequel to it, or one of the sort of tangential kind of spiritual sequels like Return of the Living Dead, which is its own sort of great comic gore fest sort of exaltation of what Romero created in this first film. But it's the most important zombie movie ever made, hands down. That is why it was important for your education, Mr. Winnick, that you see Night of the Living Dead.
Well, let me just say that I feel educated having seen it.
But you were seeing this obviously for the first time.
Yes.
So talk about it.
I don't need to go into detail about, how I feel about horror films now versus how I might have felt about them if I'd seen them as a young man or as one of the kids in that theater that Roger Ebert found himself in that Saturday afternoon. Although for some reason, sir, I picture you gleefully like laughing and clapping your hands. Would have been a very different essay by Mr. Ebert had you been in that theater, I believe.
Wild-eyed with glee, the children clapped their hands. I do have to say though, I think, and I don't know if we've ever talked about this before, but I think the first time I ever saw this film might have been on my local PBS station, which on weekend nights, we had a local horror movie host, and his name was Uncle Ted. He was a sort of Vincent Price type, white hair and a white mustache, but he was very sort of regal in his bearing, at least when he was a younger old man. And he wore a fez, and he was sort of a magician type, and he would host all of these classic horror movies, most of which I think had to have been in the public domain. And I think that may have been, it was probably around Halloween when I was a very young child, probably 6 or 7 years old, not unlike the kids in Mr. Ebert's scintillating essay.
Sounds a little bit like Svengoolie.
It was very much akin to Svengoolie or Vampiro or Elvira or any of those folks. Uncle Ted and Nephew Ned. It was real suspicious production values.
I really admired this film. I understand why this film is important. Not only because it was 1968 and there was so much going on in America, and the fact that Romero manages to capture a lot of the mood of the country at that time, but also he does it in a genre film, in ostensibly what is sort of like a B movie. A lot of the decisions that were made for this film seem to have been made for budgetary reasons. However, they actually make the film better. You can look at it now and say, wow, this must have been an earthquake of a film at the time it was released, because it really did change the game in so many ways. And I want to talk about some of those ways. There are some.
That.
Yeah, I want to start by talking about black and white and what that does for this film. The film starts out in black and white. It's just it's pretty grainy. It's just a shot of a car driving down a road. The titles come up. I think it's the name of Romero and Russo's production company. It feels like the choice to do this in black and white lends verisimilitude. It gives it a documentary style look.
Until Barbra gets to Oz, when it goes
well, and then it
full tilt.
It's also probably the reason they use Bosco chocolate syrup as the blood in this film. No Kensington gore here. I actually read in the very little research I did that they had a choice to start shooting in color, actually, about a week into this film after they received some additional funding, but they chose to keep shooting in black and white. I think that's because they didn't really want to go back and reshoot the week they'd spent on the film. But I think the film really benefits from that monochromatic look. What do you think about that?
Your point about verisimilitude is well made. I mean, I think that there are a handful of other attributes the Romero successfully incorporated into Night of the Living Dead. There's a lot of, I mean, everything is handheld, nothing is static, which is kind of different from a lot of lower budget black and white horror pictures of the time. In retrospect, from this point of view, it's like every choice that Romero made has been recycled and trotted out by a million other filmmakers who have followed in his footsteps. Everything about this is sort of iconic, and every choice contributes to that sort of overall sort of experience of seeing this film.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really imagine this film in color, and especially some of the scenes where Barbra is walking through the farmhouse before she meets Ben. The rooms are so dark, and it's just a real inky blackness.
It's totally interesting that you mentioned that, because when I rewatched it for this conversation, there's a shot of Barbra walking down a hallway where everything is either pitched into super bright, blown out, or it's ink. And as she moves through sort of pools of light and shadow, walking toward the camera, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that is the moment where she walks into the room with the taxidermy all over the walls.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She hits the door and is startled by one of the trophy heads, and the camera sort of pivots, in the same direction that her head turned. It's really, I think, exceptional camera work too. I mean, for this ragtag bunch of folks who were making sort of television advertisements in Pittsburgh, they made a lot of really smart and I think really carefully justified choices while they were shooting this film.
The one comparison that I want to make to another film or a medium is to War of the Worlds. And I don't know if this has come up for you or other people, but, I hadn't obviously seen this film before last night. And I was struck immediately by how it reminded me of War of the Worlds, mainly due to the use of TV and radio to deliver key information. In fact, the lines from the reporters and the newscasters are among the best in the film when they describe what's going on as I wrote this down, a sudden general explosion of mass homicide And then later, the radio reports very matter-of-factly that the victims appear to have been partially devoured by their murderers. What did you make of the use of TV and radio in this film?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because when I was rewatching it, I was struck afresh by how similar to War of the Worlds it felt, with the inclusion of broadcast media coverage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a new thing. That combined with things like handheld black and white camera, I mean, it really does feel kind of fly on the wall,
Yeah.
It definitely contributes to your feeling like the camera is some kind of an observer that we just haven't met yet.
Right. And you were experiencing this information for the first time along with the characters.
Yes.
Like War of the Worlds, the original radio broadcast in which, you were allegedly listening to a live report of an alien invasion that would then cut away to some ballroom in New York City. And it was, one can only imagine, a terrifying experience. To be listening to this and thinking that this was really happening. Just as in Night of the Living Dead, these characters are essentially cut off from humanity. They cannot have any idea what's going on in the outside world. Yet here's the television, here's the radio, telling you everything you need to know in increasingly gruesome detail.
The body should be disposed of at once, preferably by cremation.
Well, how long after death, then, does the body become reactivated?
It's only a matter of minutes.
Minutes? Well, that doesn't give people time to make any arrangements.
Oh, you're right. It doesn't give them time to make funeral arrangements. The bodies must be carried to the street and burned. They must be burned immediately. Soak them with gasoline and burn them. The bereaved will have to forego the dubious comforts that a funeral service will give. They're just dead flesh and dangerous.
Also, I like the fact that nobody says zombie in this film. It's flesh eaters, it's
cannibals,
ghouls,
yeah,
it's those guys. What do you make of that? Do you think that was that a conscious choice? Because there were films prior to this that used the term.
Well, I mean, there were more mystical or supernatural or, quite frankly, mechanical origins for zombies prior to this film. The zombie would have been featured as a sort of exotic character in, a story that was set in Haiti or on some Caribbean island somewhere, with, very often some white Bela Lugosi plantation owner type, who would have a horde of local villagers that he'd transformed by some shady supernatural or psychological means or pharmacological means into his labor force to cut down his sugar cane, But to your point about the sort of commentary that's built in here, I would suggest that the sequels become more on the nose about that kind of commentary, starting with Dawn of the Dead, which takes place for the lion's share of it in a shopping mall and is kind of an indictment of consumer culture, So Romero always finds a way to make his zombies relevant to whatever attribute of contemporary American life we happen to be critiquing in the year leading up to the release of Romero's next film,
Is this the first film that features zombies as sort of murderous, rampaging killers?
Well, I think it probably depends upon your definition of zombie, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we could probably say that in Caligari, there's a zombie type, who's being employed to do the bidding of his master. But under Romero's direction, there are no masters for these zombies, you know. They are kind of breaking the archetype. They're kind of exploding it wide open, you know, that there's no magic behind these zombies. There's a, you know, contaminated Jewish space laser, you know, coming from Venus.
I mean, and the zombies of this film, when you think about it, are relatively kempt, if you know what I'm saying. And they become a little bit more disgusting, don't they, in subsequent years and films, as well as a little bit quicker.
Though, you know, if you are paying close attention to some of those reports that are coming in throughout the course of the film, you know, from the news outlets or what have you, there is mention of a corpse that had been dissected, right? It was a limbless corpse that had been reanimated through whatever contaminated space junk has wrought havoc across this narrative, you know?
To pick up on what you were just saying about the use of zombies as a way of embodying the politics of the day, or the, you know, topics that were hot button issues of the time in which the film came out, one could easily just look to the casting of Duane Jones in this film, Romero making quite clear points about the treatment of African Americans in America at that time. I believe this film was either being shot or came out just after the assassination of Martin Luther King. There were riots in cities across the country. There is squabbling in this film among the people in the house. They seem to refuse to let a black man make decisions for the group. And of course, there is the killing of Ben at the end of the film, most pointedly. And it's interesting to read that the casting of Jones marked the first occasion that an African-American actor portrayed the hero in a horror film. And I think it holds up surprisingly well. Again, as I said earlier, the fact that Romero chooses to make points about America through this B film, it's amazing that he got away with it.
You know, in a Romero zombie film, the zombie is always the analog for the American sheep, right?
Right.
The sort of brainwashed participant in American culture who is not really participating in American culture of his or her own volition.
Yep.
You know, who is fed a stream of information that dictates what they think, what they wear, where they go, what they do with their time and their money. You know, I mean, really, Romero, I think, has a very poor opinion of his fellow American. And that's so exemplified in any and all of these of the dead pictures. Do you know?
Although the zombies in this film are anything but exotic. That's the interesting thing, is that they seem to be your next door neighbors. They could be anybody. So I'm not sure what point he's making about the zombies, but it is interesting the way he sets up the zombies in contrast to the mobs that are sort of rampaging across the land later in the film, taking the zombies out one at a time by shooting them in the head.
The sort of roving posses of armed men.
And the question you have to ask yourself is, who is more dangerous?
The satirical view is key to this film, you know?
Yep. Is it satirical though? I mean, the thing is the film starts, the car drives by an American flag. I mean, it's right there in your face at the very beginning of the film. And it just seems to be set up to say, we're going to be talking about America circa 1968 here. And that's exactly what the film does. And by the time this film is over and you've watched Ben's body being lifted up by meat hooks and thrown onto a flaming pyre, you know, it's like, okay, we got it loud clear, George.
With the casting of Duane Jones, though, I believe that Romero never intended or sort of always disavowed any kind of statement that was being made, because he said that Jones was simply the best actor who auditioned for the role.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that he didn't intend to make this statement. And that may very well be true, but of course the statement is made and thrown into very high relief by, as you said, having an African-American leading actor in a sort of cast with a mixed race. Yeah, it's pretty revolutionary in yet another direction.
Interesting side note, at the time of his death, Jones was the head of the theater department at SUNY Old Westbury, and they have a Duane L. Jones recital hall. He is quoted as saying, "It never occurred to me that I was hired because I was Black, but it did occur to me that because I was Black, it would give a different historic element to the film." He sounds like a fascinating guy. He didn't star in a lot more films after this, but apparently he did go on to become a professor and taught acting to a generation of students. Also, I have to say what's fascinating is the films, and I guess Romero's real lack of trust in the government to handle things. On TV, you see scientists arguing with military personnel in Washington, D.C., over the reasons that the dead are coming back to life. At some point, there's speculation it's radiation from a satellite returning from Venus. You never, it's people ingesting bleach. No one can really agree on what's causing this.
You're coming from a meeting regarding the explosion of the Venus probe, is that right?
Yes, that was the subject of the meeting.
You feel there is a connection between this and the phenomenon?
There's a definite connection.
In other words, you feel that the radiation on the Venus probe is enough to cause these mutations?
There was a very high degree of radiation.
Well, just a minute. I'm not sure that that's certain at all. I don't think that has been
logical explanation that we have at this time.
Actually, I don't think anyone figures it out. The film does not have a happy ending. It feels right. And actually, I found myself hoping both of those things would come true. That A, there would not be a happy ending to this film, and B, that they wouldn't figure it out. Because to me, to have a pat ending where things, turn out well, or, there's a simple answer to why this is happening, would just feel incredibly cheap and a cop-out. And I'm so glad they didn't do it.
Do you think it doesn't have a happy ending?
Oh, the film has a very bleak ending.
Because I would have to suggest that the ending at least gives us hope that there are more people than there are reanimated corpses.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it, sure.
You, drag that out of here and throw it on the fire. Nothing down here. All right, go ahead down and give him a hand. Let's go check out the house, man.
There's something there. I heard a noise.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes. Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
The fact that the sheriff or chief, whatever he's called, says that they're going to have it under control soon. All you do is shoot him in the head and they're, it basically takes care of it. Yes, they do seem to be getting the problem under control a little bit by the end of the film. But just the fact that poor Ben has spent the night holed up in a cellar only to wake up and wander to the window and then get shot through the head does not feel hopeful to me in the least. I think that's right for this film. I think that's the way this film needs to end to make the points that it's trying to make. In fact, we have to talk about the ending of this film because it goes off the rails in a pretty spectacular way. Talk about set pieces. So this is in rapid succession. Ben and Harry cannot seem to get along. And once that rifle becomes, loose, Harry grabs it. They fight over it. Ben shoots Harry, the overprotective dad / male chauvinist pig. Harry stumbles down the stairs to be with his sick daughter. Karen, he dies. Then Karen comes back to life. And the next thing we see, she is devouring her father. And it's discovered by Helen Cooper, the mother, and in what is a pretty horrific moment.
And I really love that performance. I think Marilyn Eastman is pretty fantastic.
She does a great job. Unfortunately, she then falls prey to young Karen as she is stabbed to death with a trowel. That whole sequence is pretty memorable. And then that leads
very unsanitary,
and that leads to the sequence I just mentioned, which is, you know, Ben waking up the next morning. And the way in which they end this film, well, over the credits, you know, the credits are basically rolling or popping on and off, and you're not seeing the lifting up of Ben's body with the meat hooks. You're on film, you're seeing it in these grainy black and white, it looks like newspaper style photos. And it's hard not to read into the significance of that. I mean, considering what this film came on the heels of, you know. So I loved the end of that film. And, you know, when we talk about films that really end on a high note, you know, in terms of action, in terms of style, in terms of the way they leave the audience feeling, completely catapults it beyond what it's been. And it's been pretty bad up to now, but it really goes to a whole other level.
I really have to wonder what the contemporary viewer would have thought in 1968 when this was released.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think they would have been completely blown away by it because there was nothing like it.
You're right, but I wonder if many of the audiences were sophisticated enough to understand what Romero's doing in this movie.
Right. That's a great question. That's why I sort of made the point about there not being a happy ending in this film. And, you know, was that unusual? The fact that it was black and white itself is kind of unusual because so many films were being made in color at that time. I mean, that would have seemed like an odd choice. To inject politics might have seemed like an odd choice. I guess I'm bringing a contemporary perspective to it. And
yeah, it's tough to have the perspective to understand, right? I mean,
whether he meant it or not, right? Was it intentional to,
or whether it was picked up on?
Well, you mentioned Romero having directed these commercials beforehand, and I heard one of them, and it was a pretty political piece about Black babies dying every 27 minutes in America under the policies of the current administration. So the fact that he's making commercials like that at that time, to me, strikes me as, okay, this guy's got an agenda. He wants to say something about America, and he's going to choose this as his vehicle for that. So did audiences pick up on that? Were they savvy enough to know that this was I don't know if satire is the word for it, but at least a message film that's sort of cloaked in a genre film? I don't know, but the fact that it's as enjoyable as it is sort of makes the broccoli go down, you know, a little bit smoother.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing that I feel like we should discuss is the fact that this film has no copyright and is therefore in the public domain. And as a result, no one made anything off it. The story, as I understand it, goes something like this. Apparently, Romero's original title for this film was Night of the Flesh Eaters. And when the film was delivered to the distributor, it was decided that because there'd been a film called The Flesh Eaters, the film's title should be changed to Night of the Living Dead. And when the new title was prepared for the film, someone failed to realize that the copyright notice was not on the screen under the original title. And that meant that this film, by default, fell into the public domain. And as a result, the filmmakers lost millions of dollars as unauthorized prints were made, as you put it, you know, could be on YouTube right now, especially in the home video era when video copies were widely available to the public, without any fees being paid to the artists. So that's kind of remarkable too, and sort of has added, I think, somewhat to the mystique of this film.
I mean, it's a cautionary tale, right?
Well, that in Texas Chainsaw, exactly. I mean,
yeah,
make sure the copyright's on the screen and don't, finance a movie using the mafia. Here's a few things that didn't work really well for me. Just a few things. So I actually have to say that I think the acting is pretty subpar throughout. And
not exclusively and not across the board.
Not across the board, but it's pretty subpar. I think that the treatment of women in this film doesn't age particularly well. Although that itself may be a political statement. We don't know. Helen Cooper is probably the strongest woman in this film, but she's continually put in her place by Harry. Judy is really a nothing role. I mean, she's just someone who stares longingly at Tom and then meets an untimely death. And Barbara is mostly in shock throughout the film. I mean, maybe appropriately so. I mean, her brother has just died and she is going through a zombie apocalypse. But I do think that the women's roles are severely underwritten in this film. Not much for them to work with.
What time is it in this film?
It is daylight. It is nighttime. It's
Barbara
daylight.
enters the house at what looks to be, high noon.
Right.
And 30 seconds later,
it's nighttime.
If you are paying attention to things that don't add up in this film,
right, you're an asshole.
You're an asshole with too much time on your hands and your mind is too tiny.
Then answer this one. Why is it the dead body upstairs never comes back to life?
I think the jury's still out.
Okay.
On the science of some of this.
Okay.
Eric, I would be lying if I said that I didn't sort of have the same thought myself this time through. It's like when Barbara first discovers the half-eaten lady of the house on the second floor, why isn't that corpse pursuing Barbara?
Right. Right. Exactly. But, again, to focus on such things,
hobgoblins hanging around some tiny mines.
And the winner is, well, the time has come.
Let's, I guess maybe move on to the award segment of the show, Barbara, in which we give out prizes for the scenes and characters that we think made this such a memorable film.
Okay, let's do it. And when you say Barbara, you're not only talking about the Barbara in this film. So let's start with the most disturbing scene in the film, in a film full of disturbing scenes.
This is the Tom Sizemore Award? Oh, no, sorry, the Tom Six Award, right?
It's actually the Tom Mix Award. Yes, it's named after a happy-go-lucky cowboy. Why don't you start us off, sir? What is your Tom Six Award winner?
I mean, it's hard,
Yep.
But I think in this film is known for a reason, and I feel like the most disturbing scene for me is probably that same moment. It's when Ben walks out of the house at the end thinking he's been rescued.
He actually doesn't even make it out of the house. That's the thing. They actually shoot him through the window, I noticed, which is even worse when you think about it. Like, they mistake him for a zombie in the house. I'm going to go with the eating of Tom and Judy after the truck.
Oh, nice.
After the truck explodes. Now,
they're like the cutest barbecue ever.
They are. And actually, I have another award dedicated to Tom and Judy later. But do you want to set it up?
At a point in which we think we're maybe going to figure out a way to get out of this, when we try to refill the gas in the truck and make an escape. There's a series of unfortunate events that causes our two young loves locked in the basement to burst into flame in the truck.
Thank you, Lemony Snicket.
thank you, Lemony Snicket, only to be eaten by the zombies. But I have to say, Eric, I really take umbrage with a lot of this, because if the zombies are after cooked meats, I mean, they don't need to be pursuing and devouring living people, right? I mean, we could just take them to a big, I don't know, pit barbecue or something.
I was just about to say, you're a Pennsylvanian. There's got to be one or two barbecue places nearby. They could just go there and enjoy a nice meal. But
is Pennsylvania really known for its barbecue, Eric?
So let's go to our next award, most likable character, the Seth Brundle Award, named for Jeff Goldblum's character in The Fly, the most likable monster you'll ever want to meet. Who do you got, sir?
I like Judy. I like Judy a lot.
Oh, God.
I do. I mean, I just feel like she's...
Judy.
I do. I feel like she's
such an odd choice.
Nobody pays attention to Judy, but I feel like Judy is so much more prepared than Barbara, who's our sort of like central female protagonist, and is useless. Yeah. Like Judy at least feels like she's got some, she's got something going on in there, and I feel like she doesn't get the chance to blossom. She just gets cooked and eaten.
I find that an odd choice, sir, but I respect it. I'm going with Ben. Perhaps a predictable choice, but let's face it, the man
is just going to give the same away. You're going to give the same actors all the awards this time around.
I gave Tom and Judy the last award. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm just thinking down the line.
Of course. Look, Ben's good with a hammer and nails. He seems really good at finding lumber. He's the kind of guy you want in your corner during a zombie apocalypse, He
doesn't put that hammer and nails through Barbara's head when she's sitting around doing nothing to try to contribute to their safety.
Exactly. Just don't make him angry. Just don't make him angry, because you won't like him when he's angry. He'll take a shotgun and he'll just put a bullet in you, whether you deserve it or not, which brings us to the character that most deserved to live and doesn't, or does she? This is the Ellen Ripley Award, named for Sigourney Weaver's character in the Alien cinematic universe.
Never heard of it.
I'm going to say that the character that most deserved to live is poor Karen Cooper.
Huh.
Poor Karen. What does she do in this film? Nothing. She's sick, lying on a towel on a makeshift bed in the cellar. She's been bitten by God knows what. She's not conscious throughout the film. Just at the very end, at which point she starts snacking on her dead dad and killing her mom with garden implements. I just, she seems like she might have been a nice kid at one point. We just never really get the chance to get to know her. So I wish she had lived. I wish we'd gotten to know Karen Cooper a little bit better.
Now, you see, here is where I thought you'd be giving an award to Duane Jones, because I think the character who most deserved to live is Ben. Why give it to that little girl?
Why not give it to them? Listen,
she contributes nothing.
Excuse me.
She prowls her mother to death.
You are letting your distaste and your hatred of children get in the way of your love for poor Karen Cooper in this film.
If I could have given anybody a get out of jail free card on this one, it would have been Ben.
Look, I'm giving Ben an award. I'm giving him most likable character. He's getting
and you see that's why
he's getting the Brundle Award.
So I assumed you were just going to be giving out the same guy, all the awards tonight.
No, sir. I'm trying to, give a little variety, a little spice,
Well, then let's see who you've got for the character who most deserved to die. The John Doe Award.
Yes.
Named for Kevin Spacey's character in the movie Seven, of course.
I hope, sir, that we agree on this one.
I hope so too.
But let me just say, the fact that this award is the character that most deserved to die, and does, begs the question, of course, does any character really die in this film? Well, sure, I guess if they're shot in the head, they die. But anyway, I got to give the John Doe Award to Harry Cooper, that argumentative bastard. Not only is he a jerk to his lovely wife, Helen, he's just an asshole, basically. And, the fact that he's so, he kind of sort of, participates. He throws Molotov cocktails from the second floor. He kind of helps out and participates, but it's self-preservation. When Harry Cooper bid it, I was just like, good riddance.
Well, I have to say, I felt the same way about Russell Streiner.
Oh God.
In the role of Johnny.
Oh.
He was so
most deserved to die.
I wouldn't save him.
Okay.
Like if I were there in the graveyard and I just watched him be really mean to his sister and tease her and scare her.
What does he say to her again?
They're coming to get you, Barbara. In his best, like, Bobby Boris Pickett, voice.
Yes.
But if I were there, if I were sort of a silent observer, and I happened to be carrying, I don't know, a nice thick goose down pillow, I wouldn't rush to put it in between Johnny's head and the edge of the tombstone that stung the life out of him.
Most gratuitous screen moment, the Gaspar Noé/Ken Russell Award, named for two filmmakers known for their gratuitous moments.
I don't think I've ever picked up on a gratuitous moment in a Ken Russell film ever.
Not a one, sir. Not a one.
I actually kind of feel like the most gratuitous moment is sort of that sort of post-truck explosion barbecue.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Again, I sort of feel like eating the cooked meat is not particularly appropriate to a zombie story, but also, it just seemed a little sensational. It seemed a little gratuitous.
Interesting, sir. Did I mention this is a film about flesh-eating ghouls?
Well, you did, but maybe the gratuitous part was the cooking.
Well, that could be, but maybe seeing them actually eat flesh makes sense in context.
But it's cooked, Eric. It just doesn't feel particularly canon.
Okay, so it should have been raw, is what you're saying.
It should have been raw, absolutely.
It's gratuitous because it should have been raw. Okay, I'm going to go back to Tom and Judy. Not only are they involved in the most disturbing scene, well, the remains of them are involved, I should say, but they are also involved in the most gratuitous screen moment, and that is the tender, touching scene between Tom and Judy before he heads out to gas up the truck. There is a moment where they have a really heartfelt discussion that comes straight out of left field. He talks about her smile. I think they kiss at one point. I think the score kind of rises to meet the moment.
Score.
And it feels entirely grafted on in order to make us invest in these characters more. But the truth is, we don't know anything about them, so we don't feel anything. So the scene is really just a mawkish attempt to raise some stakes. Now, it doesn't make...
Hard-hearted.
Look, sir, it doesn't make the fact that they blow up in the truck any worse or any better. But at the same time, it's just like, there's nothing like it in the film. And so to me, it just sticks out like a sore thumb.
And what sticks out like a sore thumb should be cut off like a sore thumb.
And if there's any film in which a sore thumb should be cut off, it's this one.
Night of the Living Dead.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you do, give us a rating on iTunes, tell your friends, and smash that subscribe button. And be sure to check out additional information on our website, 21jumpscare.com.
Our theme music is by Sir Cubworth. How can our audience find you online, Mr. Winnick?
Well, I'm doing a podcast called 21 Jump Scare with you, Mr. Lorick. So
never heard of it. Well, thank you very much for joining us, folks. We will see you next time at the internet's latest address for horror, 21 Jump Scare.